Now, this chart over here, this output shows you how many chips to add to the pot to account for this bounty. But you see the number changes as play progresses. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, and today we are going to be discussing bounty tournaments and progressive knockout bounty tournaments. These are two pretty popular forms of poker tournaments, and typically bounty tournaments that are not progressive are quite popular live, whereas the progressive bounty tournaments, where the bounty changes as play progresses, are more popular online because it's just way easier to keep track of all of the accounting online. But whenever you are playing these tournaments, your strategy should be a little bit different compared to regular freeze-out or re-entry tournaments, and I want to make sure you're not making mistakes in those games. This is actually a presentation from my tournament masterclass at PokerCoaching.com. It's a giant course, over 30 hours long, and it goes through all sorts of different types of poker tournaments, like satellites, six-handed tournaments, etc., to be sure that you are making the proper adjustments to these types of games. But I realize these bounty tournaments are very popular, and I want to make sure that you are not screwing up. So, whenever you are playing any non-traditional tournament, you always want to ask, what has actually changed? And in a bounty tournament, the main difference is that some amount of each buy-in goes to the main prize pool, like a regular tournament, but then some other amount of the buy-in goes to a bounty prize pool. So instead of having one main prize pool where 15% of the people get money, now we have two prize pools. And depending on the structure of the bounty, or the tournament in general, some of the prize pool will be distributed among a larger portion of the field. For example, let's say we're playing a bounty tournament that's a $100 buy-in tournament where $50 goes to the main prize pool and $50 goes to the bounty, okay? Sometimes this is called a super knockout tournament when it's 50-50. In this case, let's say I bust someone on the first hand, okay? So I collect someone's $50 bounty, that goes in my pocket. Let's say we play for a little while and then I bust halfway through the tournament. I didn't get in the money, but I collected a $50 bounty, right? And that's gonna happen to a lot of people. And what's gonna happen is a lot of people are going to collect a little bit of cash, which in this scenario results in a very flat payout structure, which is a little bit different than a regular tournament, right? Because in a regular tournament, 15% of the field gets paid, whereas in a super knockout tournament, a whole lot of the field will get paid a little bit of money. In bounty tournaments, compared to regular tournaments, there's a whole lot of value in having one of the largest stacks at the table because that allows you the chance to bust your opponents. If you're a short stack in a bounty tournament, that is not good. That is not where you want to be because you are going to have a difficult time winning the bounty chips, which are valuable. So when you are playing a bounty tournament, you want to be able to convert the bounties into chips so that you can properly assess whether or not you should make a call or a fold accounting for the bounty. Because if there is money in the pot that you're not accounting for, you're going to make errors. And so I'm going to teach you how to do that right now. In regular bounty tournaments where the bounty does not change, it's actually pretty easy to figure this out. It's a little bit more difficult in progressive knockout tournaments, which we're going to get to in a minute. So in a regular bounty tournament, the bounty in terms of chips is equal to a starting stack, whatever the starting stack is in your tournament, times the bounty amount divided by the total buy-in amount. So let's say you're playing in a $50 plus $50 tournament, what we talked about earlier, right? You buy in for $100, $50 goes to the main prize pool, $50 goes to the bounty prize pool. In this scenario, if you want to convert the bounty to chips, you take $50, which is the bounty prize pool, usually it's the second number displayed here, divided by the total buy-in, which is $100, which is 50% of a starting stack. So if they start you with, let's say, 10,000 chips, 50% of a 10,000 chip starting stack would be 5,000 chips, right? So if someone goes all in and you cover them, you have more chips than them, you essentially add 5,000 more chips to the pot and then run your equity calculation, which I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. Another popular structure is a 2/3, 1/3 structure. So let's say a $67 tournament with a 33 bounty. So this would be $100 total, just like the 50-50 structure, except for now it's 67-33, where 33% right here goes to the bounty. So the bounty is now smaller. So in this scenario, it is 33 divided by 100. So it'd be 33% of a starting stack. If they started you with, let's get out the calculator and do some random amount. Let's say they started you with 25,000 chips in your tournament. 25,000 times 0.33 equals 8,250 chips, right? And if you are going to go play a bounty tournament, make sure you know what the bounty's worth before you show up to play, because you want to make sure you're not making errors and having to figure it out on the fly if you can do a little bit of work ahead of time. Let's say they started you with, I don't know, some weird amount, 750,000 chips, which never happens. But let's say they do this, do this number times 0.33, which is going to be 247,500, okay? One more example. Sometimes you'll see in live casinos, $80 plus $20. In this scenario, it would be 20 divided by 100, which is 20% of a starting stack. So again, just get out your calculator. Let's say they start you with 7,500 chips times 0.2 equals 1,500 chips. So if you can collect your bounty, your opponent's bounty in this scenario is worth 1,500 chips. It is worth noting that if you have an edge over your opponents, if you think you have a skill advantage over them, you should probably value the bounties a little bit less. And if you think you're at a disadvantage to your opponents, you should probably value the bounties a little bit more. And that's because if you have an edge in the tournament, you don't really want to cash out of the tournament. You want to keep playing the tournament, right? And every time you take money out of the tournament, you kind of cash that out and put it in your pocket. You take it off the table. You're forced to take it off the table. It's not an option. So you want to make sure you want to undervalue the bounties a little bit if you have a big skill advantage, and you want to overvalue the bounties a little bit if you don't have a skill advantage. Also, there's certainly merit in not making a close to profitable call, like a barely profitable call, in a scenario where if calling and losing will result in you no longer covering a lot of the people at the table, because then you won't be able to collect bounties in the future. So that's another concern that you should be aware of. So let's go through an example here. Let's say in a $50 plus $50 tournament that starts with 10,000 chips, at 500, 1,000, with a 1,000 chip ante, you raise from the cutoff to 2,000 out of your 25,000 stack. So you have 2.5 starting stacks here. And the button goes all in for 20,000 chips. So you make it 2 big blinds, they go all in for 20 big blinds. Everyone folds around to you. Everyone folds around to you twice. Everyone folds around to you. Which hands should you call with? Okay, let's figure it out. Well, first things first, how often do we need to win? First thing you want to ask yourself, how often do we need to win in this scenario? Take a second, try to figure out the math on your own end. If this kind of thing is unfamiliar to you, I have a free fundamentals course at pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. Make sure you check this out because we explain how to figure out this very, very common spot. All right, in this scenario, you take the amount you have to call, which is 18,000 chips. How did we get 18,000 chips? Well, we raised to 2, right? We raised to 2, and we have to put in 20 total. So 20 minus 2 is 18. So we have to put in 18,000 chips divided by the total pot that we can win. The entire pot, okay? So what is the entire pot? Well, it's our opponent's 20,000. It's our 20,000 plus the small blind, the big blind, and the ante. In this scenario, it's cut off against a button, so we need to account for the small blind, the big blind, and the ante. That is 500 plus 1,000 with the 1,000 big blind ante, so that's 2,500. And then we have to figure out what the bounty is worth. Well, in this scenario, 50-50 tournament, that means half of a starting stack is what the bounty is worth. Half of 10,000 is 5,000, and that is this number here. You add all this up in a calculator, do the math, and that gives you 37.8% equity. So we need at least 37.8% equity to justify calling in this scenario. So now you want to ask, which hands have more than 37.8% equity against your opponent's range? And the answer is, it depends. There's actually a tool in Equilab. This is a free program. Just search Poker Strategy Equilab. It'll come right up, where you can do the hand range calculator feature. So in this scenario, what you want to do is we need to figure out which hands have more than 37.8% equity. So we assign the opponent a range here. What do we think they're actually going to go all in with? And this is where you need to use a little bit of your logic. Figure out what you think they're going to shove all in for 20 big blinds. Who knows what it actually is, but we can just look at a few hypothetical scenarios. Let's say in this scenario, you think they're going to shove kind of wide for whatever reason. Let's say you think they're going to go all in with this range, okay? Click apply. It takes this range and puts it right here. We go to Tools, Hand Range Calculator, and now we type in 37.8%. But we probably want to have a little bit of an edge if we think we're a good, strong winning player in this tournament. So you want to have a little bit more equity than the break-even amount. So let's say we want to have 38.5% equity, let's just say. Click calculate range, take to main window, and now you see that we should call off with this range, which is actually pretty wide. And that's because right now, the bounty, is still a little bit relevant, okay? So this is a spot where we are going to be calling with roughly this range. Notice if this 5,000 chips was not in the pot, though, what we would do is we would instead have a slightly different equation over here. We would have 18,000 divided by, what, 42.5? 42,500 equals. So now we need 40, let's say 43.5% equity to call if there was no bounty. So with a bounty, in this scenario, we get to call off with this range, which is, what is this, 32% of hands. Pretty wide, right? We can go over here to figure out if there was no ante. What number did I say? Make sure you get your numbers right within reason. Let's say 43.5%. Again, I'm accounting for a little bit of an edge here. You see, if there was no bounty, instead of calling off with the 32% range, we would call off with a 17% range. So a whole lot tighter, right? We call off a whole lot tighter if there is no bounty. All right? And that's it. That's all you have to do to figure out what you should be calling with in these scenarios. Again, if calling and losing would result in you covering fewer players, you want to call a little bit tighter. And if you think you have a big edge, you want to call a little bit tighter. If you think you have a big disadvantage, you want to call a little bit looser. Let's take a look at a slightly different example. Let's say in a 50-50 tournament, you start with 100,000 chips. So in the previous example, we had 10,000. Now we're starting with 100,000. Same exact scenario besides that. We raised to 2,000 in the cutoff. Button goes in for 20,000. So in this scenario, we both got really, really short right off the bat. But here we are. Everyone folds around us. Which hand should we call with? Now the equation is going to be different. 18,000, same thing, divided by the total pot we can win, which is our opponent's 20K, our 20K, the 2,500 small blind, big blind ante, plus whatever the bounty's worth. And in this scenario, the bounty's worth 50,000 chips. Why? Well, 50% of 100,000 starting stack is 50,000. Do this math. Now we need 19.5% equity. Which hands have 19.5% equity? Well, turns out it's going to be a lot of them. We can go tools, hand range calculator. Now we need, let's say we even want to have an edge. Let's say we want 20, let's say we want to have 21% equity, okay? You're going to see here, which hands have 21% equity against our opponent's range? Well, all of them. So you're going to find that in this scenario, the bounty is really, 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 really relevant, and that's going to result in us calling very, very wide. And this is actually a very important point for static rebuy tournaments where the bounty does not change. The bounties usually matter a pretty good amount early in the tournament, unless, of course, you're playing like an 80-20 structure where the bounty is very, very small. So the bounties usually matter a lot early in the tournament, but they don't matter much at all late in the tournament. I mean, as a hypothetical example here, like imagine, let's say we were in this same scenario, except for now, our opponent, like we raised to, let's say, 20,000, and our opponent goes all in for 200,000, and the bounty's worth 5,000 chips, right? 5,000 chips added on top of a 425,000 pot is basically nothing, right? And that is often what happens at the very, very end of these bounty tournaments. So, important point in static bounty tournaments is that the bounties matter a lot early and not much late. All right, that was the easy part. Now let's discuss progressive knockout tournaments. Okay, so what has changed? Same thing as a regular bounty tournament. Some amount goes to the main prize pool, some amount goes to the bounty prize pool. Same thing as before. Depending on the structure, a larger portion of the field is going to get paid, but usually it's not quite as the same as a static bounty tournament because the bounties increase over time, which means if you bust people later in the tournament, you collect larger bounties. And in this scenario, there's really a lot of value in having one of the largest stacks at a table. These bounties are actually kind of difficult to calculate. There are a few shorthand methods or shortcuts some people use, but I'm just going to give you a calculator that shows you how to do this. So it's important to note that the bounty changes in value as play progresses, as players are eliminated. So when someone is eliminated, half of their bounty is cashed out, but then the other half of the bounty is added to the player who busts that player, and that results in, as the play progresses, the bounties increase. And there's a spreadsheet available for you at pokercoaching.com PKO. You can also find it in the tool section at pokercoaching.com that shows you how to figure out what the bounties are worth. So let's take a look at the PKO calculator really quick. First thing you do, enter the tournament buy-in, enter the starting stack, and enter the villains displayed bounty. This is assuming you're playing on a site where 25% of the bounty is displayed immediately. This also assumes a 50-50 structure, which is by far the most common structure. So let's say you buy into a $100 tournament. The displayed bounty will be $25. On some sites, it may be $50 that is displayed there, but that is not what this assumes. So you want to make sure whenever you start the tournament, it's a fourth of whatever you start with. So let's say we're playing a $100 tournament. That means 50% goes to the regular prize pool, 50% goes to the bounty. $25 is won on the spot if you bust that person initially. And let's say we start with 5,000 chips, let's just say. So we change that number. Villains displayed bounty. Now this amount is how much of the bounty is displayed for your opponent. Let's say your opponent has a $75 bounty on their head because they've busted a few people. Okay? Now, this chart over here, this output, shows you how many chips to add to the pot to account for this bounty. But you see the number changes as play progresses. So you want to look at the percentage of the field that remains. Let's say half of the players have busted. You navigate down here to 50%. In this scenario, this bounty of $75 is worth about 4,320 chips. Now, this is not going to be perfectly accurate because the bounties sometimes get cashed out more or less depending on how players bust. But this is going to give you a pretty rough estimate of what the bounty is worth. And this is going to be way more accurate than any of the shorthand guessing methods. Let's say your opponent has a lot of bounties. Let's say they have, 12 bounties. 25 times 12 is 300. Now you see the bounty is way more valuable in terms of chips, right? Let's say instead the starting stack was, 100,000 chips, right? Now you see, it's going to change the value of the bounty. Okay, so that's how this works. And, it's a nice, easy thing to use. You can just pull it up on the side when you are playing. This is not against any terms and conditions so far. And you really never have to guess about the value of the bounty again. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say in a PKO tournament where each player starts with 10,000 chips. The small blind goes all in for 200,000 chips at 10,000, 20,000 blinds. Okay, so we have to answer all of these questions. How much of the field is remaining? How many starting bounties do they have? How many chips is their bounty worth? How much equity do we need to call? What's their shoving range? Which hands can profitably call? All right, let's assume 10% of the field is remaining because, as you see, we have a whole boatload of chips. And let's assume they have 12 starting bounties. Again, this number will be displayed underneath their avatar whenever you're playing online. So, in this scenario, let's figure out the math. So, let's say we're playing this $50 plus $50 tournament. We start with 10,000 chips, as we have here. And let's say they have 12 starting bounties, which is $300. And 10% of the field remains, right? So we navigate down here. We see that in this scenario, the opponent's bounty is worth 43,800 chips, okay? So in this scenario, we have to call, in this scenario, small blind goes all in, and we are in the big blind, okay? We have to call how many more? We have to call 180,000 more, our 20 minus the 200 minus our 20 that's already in the pot. 180,000 divided by the total pot we can win, which is our opponent's 200, our 200, and the ante. Plus whatever the bounty is worth. In this case, 43,800. Do the math. That gives us 38.8% equity. Okay? Good. Now let's assume they're going to shove with 60% of hands. We can go back over here and use Equilab to figure out what we should call with, right? So let's just give them a random 60%. You obviously want to be a little bit more precise than this. Tools, hand range calculator, type in, what was our equity we needed? We needed 38.8. Let's presume we need 39, let's just say, to account for any edge that we may have. 39%, calculate hand range, take to the main window. And you see here, this is what we should call with in this scenario, which is actually really, really wide if you think about it. Small blind goes all in for 10 big blinds in this scenario. We are supposed to call off with this range, which is pretty wide. Let's take a look at what we would normally call off with while we're here. We would take 180 divided by 420 equals 43% equity. So if we normally need 43%, instead of calling off with this range, we would have called off tighter if there was no bounty, right? So now we go over here, make this 43. And so instead of 60% of hands calling off, we would have called off with 47% of hands, right? Or 45% of hands, which is substantially tighter. So you see that this bounty was very, very relevant. Also, it is worth noting again, if calling and losing in this scenario would result in you not covering nearly as many of your opponents, then you should call a little bit tighter. If you'd still cover your opponents, then you should be more than happy to call it off in this spot. It's also worth noting that when you are the shallow stack, you need to be shoving tighter, for the most part, into players who can bust you, who will be getting reasonable odds to call because they are incentivized to call off a little bit wider. A big mistake a lot of people make is just following a push-fold chart when you're playing a progressive bounty tournament. And that's going to result in you shoving too wide as the shallow stack. Alternatively, let's say you're the big stack and everyone folds to you in the small blind. Let's say your opponent has 10 big blinds in the big blind and you are in the small blind with a bunch of chips. That's a scenario where normally you would just follow a push-shove chart and shove a lot of the time, although you could have a limping range too. But let's say you're going to shove in this scenario. If you're playing a bounty tournament and your opponent's bounty is relevant, you should actually shove much wider, sometimes way wider, because if you shove and they call, you have that additional value of the bounty being added to the pot. So make sure you do your best to account for that. In general, when you can collect your opponent's bounty, you want to be way more aggressive. You want to be trying to get money in the pot in general. And when you cannot collect their bounty, you need to be tighter and a little bit more cautious. Also, in progressive bounty tournaments, this is very, 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 very important. As play progresses, money is removed from the bounty prize pool, resulting in you no longer being able to collect it. And therefore, it is vitally important that you buy in on time or very early in progressive knockout tournaments. You do not want to be late registering into these tournaments because a lot of the prize pool has already been eliminated. And also, you're going to be one of the short stacks, right? If you buy in last second with 8 big blinds and everybody else has 40 big blinds, it's going to be a long time before you have any chance to collect any bounties. And that is not where you want to be. In these tournaments, you are rewarded for getting a hold of chips and having your opponents covered. So make sure you buy in on time. And if you do bust towards the end of the reentry period, be disciplined and don't just fire in another buy-in because you are lighting money on fire by doing that. Also, make sure you get this progressive knockout tournament calculator. It's quick and easy to use. Like I said, it's not perfect. It's going to be close enough, though, to the point that it is definitely worth using, and it's easy to use, right? Nice, simple, easy to use. I do my best to give all of you easy, actionable information that you can apply in-game to ensure that you do not screw up. I don't want you having complicated formulas flying around in your head while you're playing a bunch of tables at a time, because that's going to result in you making errors left and right. And if you make a lot of errors, you're going to be torching your money. So make sure you use the tools that are available at pokercoaching.com. This is available at pokercoaching.com/PKO. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe buttons below. Also, there's a notification bell. If you click that, that'll let you know whenever we have any new content available. Hope you enjoyed this. Good luck in your games. Have a great, great day. And I'll talk to you later. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.